Well, it's been another extraordinary week in international affairs, especially as it relates to defence, Australia and the AUKUS partners. The Middle East appears to have stepped back from the brink, or at least hesitated before stepping off the edge, after the US and Iran signed a framework agreement. And in Britain, the earthquake continues, with Keir Starmer's resignation and another change of Prime Minister. Both stories have major implications for defence, and that's what we're going to unpack today. I'm Andrew Kirby, President of Rusi Queensland and co-host of In Our Defence, and joining me as always is Defence Industry Insider James Baker. James, let's start with Iran. Everyone's heard about this 14-point deal, but what actually is it?
I'll tell you first what it isn't. It isn't a peace treaty. It's more like a framework for getting to a peace treaty. The US and Iran have agreed to stop fighting while they spend 60 days trying to negotiate something more permanent. At present, that period ends on August 16, and it is extendable by mutual consent. In the meantime, commercial shipping can move back through the Strait of Hormuz. Some sanctions on Iranian oil are being eased. Frozen assets are starting to be released, and the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors are preparing to head back into the country. The details on the toughest nuclear sites are still being worked out. Now, before anyone thinks this has all been solved, the really hard issues are still sitting on the table. They're still arguing over how much uranium Iran can keep, what happens to its ballistic missile program, how intrusive inspections will be, and exactly how quickly sanctions are lifted. So I describe it as a tactical pause rather than a strategic settlement. It's reduced the immediate risk of a wider war, but whether it becomes something lasting over the next couple of months is still anyone's guess. And I guess we have to be asking the question, what are the lessons for Australia?
Well, I think there's at least three big ones off the bat. You've got to be prepared to fight before America turns up. You've got to be prepared to work with the United States when it turns up. And you need to be prepared to look after your own security if and when the United States leaves. So if we look at the situation in the Middle East, it actually begins with Israel dealing with a pretty wicked problem in the Iranian nuclear sites, leading to Operation Rising Lion, which occurred before the US started throwing hands with Operation Midnight Hammer and then Operation Epic Fury. The US administration has communicated pretty clearly that it is most likely to help countries that have put the resources and the will to help themselves. Secondly, you've got to be interoperable with the US. No nation, no matter how capable, and Israel is an incredibly capable military, can prosecute a long or complex campaign like we've seen in the Middle East on their own without significant US support. But perhaps, I think most saliently coming out of the recent negotiations, where the US really dealt unilaterally with Iran and covered issues that are significant to Israel, such as the issue of Hezbollah in Lebanon, is the fact that you've got to be prepared to take responsibility for your own security after the US might have achieved its own war termination criteria and decided to call it a day before all the issues that matter to you are dealt with, which is something that we're seeing Israel deal with today and potentially something that Australia may have to deal with in a future crisis or conflict. But there's a lot of focus on, I think, the partners and the strategic aspects of this, but I think there's also some technical and operational lessons here, James.
There's definitely a lesson in asymmetry. Again, Iran has again shown that relatively cheap drones, missiles, naval mines and proxy forces can force much larger and better equipped militaries to spend enormous amounts of money responding. That's a lesson Australia should pay very close attention to. We still need the high-end capabilities like submarines and frigates and advanced aircraft, but we'll also need affordable mass, large numbers, autonomous systems, long-range missiles, cyber capabilities, and resilient supply chains. The days when expensive platforms alone guarantee military advantage are fading very quickly.
Indeed. And I think what we're seeing now is that the depth of capacity is starting to have strategic and geopolitical implications. Iran still clearly has the ability to hold parts of the Straits of Hormuz at risk. And I think that started to lead to some different strategies being taken by the Gulf cooperation nations. We're seeing the Emiratis, for instance, pursue a perhaps slightly stronger line than the Saudis who are taking a more conciliatory tone. And this is starting to unravel not just the Gulf cooperation nations, but also it's a challenge to the Carter Doctrine, a policy the US has had since the presidency of Jimmy Carter, suggesting the US would always be the dominant provider of security in the Middle East. And many of the nations there are no longer 100% guaranteed security by the US in the way they once were. But this is not just happening in the Middle East. In the United Kingdom, we've seen most recently a new Prime Minister after the resignations of the Defence Minister and the Minister for the Armed Forces that we covered on our last episode. And now that popular Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham is likely to be in number 10 sometime soon, I imagine we're going to see a complete reversal of policy and rivers of gold flowing back to the MOD, James.
Yeah, I don't think any of us will be holding our breath for that. Keir Starmer's resignation has happened remarkably smoothly, and Burnham looks well placed to become the next British Prime Minister. But from a defence perspective, I wouldn't expect dramatic change, either overnight or possibly ever. The Defence Investment Plan is still long overdue. It's now being rushed towards publication ahead of the NATO summit that starts on July 7th. And new Defence Secretary Dan Jarvis is reportedly trying to secure more funding than the package that prompted his predecessor, John Healey, to resign earlier this month. Healey's complaint was pretty simple. The money didn't match the rhetoric. He argued the funding was pushed too far into the future, while today's security threats demanded action now. Burnham certainly seems as though he's more supportive of defence spending, and there are reports of ideas like defence bonds being considered, but he'll inherit exactly the same fiscal pressures that frustrated his predecessor. For the defence industry, that means uncertainty continues. Strategically, I don't think AUKUS itself is in danger. Governments come and go, but the strategic logic remains very strong. The bigger question is whether Britain's industrial capacity and defence budget can keep pace with the ambitions of Pillar 1 of AUKUS. For Australia, it's another reminder that while alliances are indispensable, sovereign capability still matters enormously, because even our closest partners have domestic, political and budget pressures of their own.
Well, whether it's the goings-on in the Middle East, nuclear deals, or the latest episode of Yes, Prime Minister out of number 10, the enduring point is that these global affairs and impacts on defence have local ramifications for Australia. That means strong alliances, clear-eyed strategy, and the willingness and ability to carry more of our own weight. Thanks for watching the latest In Our Defence update. Please like and subscribe and keep following us for more on defence, strategy, and the world around us.